Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Tonight, I'm going to be reacting to the state of the US is depressing, the Great Depression between two wars, 1933, part 2 of 3 by Time Ghost History. If you want to check out my previous reactions to other Time Ghost History between two wars videos, remember that I've compiled the playlist, and you'll find it at the top here. Just click on it and you'll be able to access them. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Time Ghost History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
On March 4th, 1933, at the height of the Great Depression, a new president of the United States of America takes the oath of office. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt has promised a new deal for the American people to take them out of their nosedive before the American economy crashes completely and is literally bankrupt. There's only one thing. No one, including the president, really has a plan for how to do that. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. In our 1929 episode on the Wall Street crash, we saw how it rocked not only the American economy, but also the American dream of opportunity for prosperity for all. The psychological effect had been immediate. Although the plummet in the value of the stock market only directly affected a minority of Americans, its symbol as an indicator of economic progress panicked the majority. Economic activity immediately slowed as Americans reined in spending. Now in 1933, the United States is caught in the throes of the worst financial crisis that it has ever experienced. It is the Great Depression. But the crash alone did not cause the Depression. Instead, subsequent crises created a domino effect, tumbling the U.S. into a dramatic economic downturn. Even in 2019, historians still debate which of these events is the event. There are some definite measurable effects that we can conclude contributed in some way. How much is a matter of interpretation, of course.
So you could say it's like a perfect storm that just occurred, and it destroyed the US economy, and it also gave this perception that the US economy is not going to bounce back anytime soon. It was just a perfect storm, ingredients coming in from everywhere, coalescing together and creating this perfect storm that just ravaged the US economy during that time.
The first measurable effect is the stock market collapse itself, which, beyond the psychological impact, also eliminates staggering amounts of investment capital, impacting actual operations and production. Then the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in June 1930 creates some of the most radical protectionist trade policies in the history of the United States. Raised tariffs on imported goods launch instant retaliation from America's trading partners with their own protectionist policies, which in turn further exacerbates already ailing foreign trade.
I guess the World Trade Organization didn't exist during that time. Yeah.
A bigger shock in monetary terms is the series of bank collapses that follow the crash in waves. Some of these are tightly linked to the international debt system, creating complex dependencies between US banks and the also suffering global economy. Could it have been avoided? Well, that is a contentious issue that we will never be able to conclude definitely. Some economists say that intervention in the banking system and more involvement of the Federal Reserve to prop up the banks could have thwarted the crisis. Others claim that it was too much intervention by the Fed that tipped the balance.
I don't even think, intervention in the banks could have necessarily prevented something like this from happening. Because just like Indy Nidell said that, there were many other factors that also contributed to the collapse. It wasn't just mainly the banking institutions. So, yeah, I don't know if it would have been enough. Yeah.
Followers of John Maynard Keynes' idea that an economy in shock is incapable of self-recovery, so stimulus through public spending and tax cuts is your way out of the crisis, say that started too late. Opponents of the Keynesian theory say it shouldn't have started at all, and a lack of public finance austerity aggravated the crisis, and so on. In essence, it's complicated, but I'm sure that quite a few of you have your own opinions to share, and we will see them in the comments. Whatever and whoever caused it, and whether or not it could have been stopped, there is no debate about what actually happens. The banking system slides ever deeper into crisis. In 1931 alone, nearly 3,000 banks, holding close to $1.7 billion in deposits, collapse. Many Americans will never see their savings again. By 1932, 11.5 million Americans, it's around 1/4 of the workforce, are unemployed. The unemployment rate for African Americans is at least 2 times that, and in some places, 3 times above the national average. For those lucky enough to still be working, though, underemployment is a fact of life. Pay and hours are slashed. So by the summer of 1932, more than half of working Americans are only employed part-time. Whole families lose their sources of income, are unable to make mortgage payments or pay rent, and lose their homes. Tumbling commodity prices, already a problem for farmers in the roaring 20s, continued to plummet. In 1929, cotton farmers received around 16 cents per pound. This drops to only 5 in the early years of the 1930s. And already before droughts hit, hundreds of thousands of farming families become migrant farm workers, taking work wherever they can find it. As incomes disappear, purchasing power drops, which sends prices tumbling, which in turn eliminates purchasing power from the sellers and wholesalers, who have to drop prices further to move their product.
It's a snake eating its own tail.
A vicious circle that just pulls the economy further and further into a tailspin. By 1933, industrial production will have fallen by 37%, prices by 33%, and real GNP by 30%. The economic hardship has a massive effect on social relations. No longer is there any clear separation between destitute layabouts and well-to-do working Americans. And many middle-class Americans who now find themselves unemployed struggle to accept the harsh reality that they too need public assistance. A doctor working at a free clinic at the time will recall later in his life, people of that status would find it very difficult to accept charity. Every day, someone would faint on a streetcar. They'd bring him in, and they wouldn't ask any questions. They knew what it was: hunger. When he regained consciousness, they'd give him something to eat. It's no wonder.
Wow. In America, the middle class they have this pride about themselves. They don't want to be helped. They would rather go hungry than to be helped. But then when you go across the Atlantic Ocean over to Europe and mainly Russia and what's going on there, literally food is being taken from their mouths and being sold to other countries. That their hunger is being forced upon them by their own government. It's interesting how these two situations are so different, but also the same, in terms of the economic turmoil that's occurring across the world.
Wonder that the bitterness and impoverishment of the era are reflected in one of the best-selling records of the day, most famously recorded by Bing Crosby in 1932, "Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?" was instantly an anthem of the Great Depression.
Oh-ho, Indian Idol, oh-ho!
They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed the mob. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there, right on the job. They used to tell me I was building a dream with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing in line just waiting for bread? Well, I built a railroad, I made it run, I made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Brother, can you spare a dime?
Whoa! Oh, 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 oh.
If that isn't enough to showcase the pessimism of the time, then just look at how birth rates fell from close to 3 children per woman in 1928 to 2.1 in 1936. People simply could not afford to have children. Regardless.
Interesting. But for some reason, in countries that are, that have poverty, right? There's a lot of people having a lot of children. Like, they cannot afford their own lifestyles. They cannot afford, having a roof over their heads. Yet they're having children. I don't understand why is that. Is it because, we don't have contraceptives or condoms? Things that are meant to prevent pregnancy. Is it because we don't have that in poverty-stricken areas, or is it something else? I am not entirely sure. But I find this interesting, that in the US during 1933, during the Great Depression, people were having less children because they could not afford it. Yet in 2022, in particular my own country, people are having children when they know fully well that they cannot afford to, have a child, get that child education and all the other amenities that are required for a child to survive and to enjoy its life. So I find it so strange. I know in some cases it might be because of rape, that's something that could contribute to the high pregnancy rate. But still, there are a lot of young people who just have children, and you just ask yourself, why are you having children now? I mean, you're still in high school, or you're still in university, you're still trying to find your own 2 feet. But it's just strange. Yeah.
If it's his fault or not, it reflects poorly on incumbent President Hoover during the 1932 presidential election campaign. He had become an American icon during the Great War, when he was at the head of the Allied effort to feed the starving Belgian population. He had promised a glorious future for America on the campaign trail and won the election by a landslide in 1928. But a sizable portion of the electorate now sees his handling of the crisis as inadequate. Hoover believed that active government policy was needed to ward off recession, and in 1930 works to increase federal and state spending. But the Depression only deepens. When his first measures have little effect, he tries again at the end of 1931 to save the economy and his presidency. With the creation of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC, he aims to lend public funds on a massive scale to banks and other financial institutions. His program is historic. Never before in peacetime has a federal government intervened so directly in the economy. But again, it fails to thwart the recession. The fact that the RFC provides financial assistance to banks, but not ordinary Americans, is used by the Democrats to accuse Hoover of being too cozy with East Coast elites.
But I also don't understand how was that going to really help the people by giving money to the banks. I don't understand how is that going to help,
Then a public relations disaster hits Hoover at what ironically is at the core of his reputation, the legacy of his World War I achievements. In 1924, Congress had passed the World War Adjusted Compensation Act, or the Bonus Act, which provided for a retirement payment to veterans. Immediate payments were limited and small, but most veterans received what was called an Adjusted Service Certificate, a specified bonus they were owed and could redeem after their birthday in the year 1945. When hard times and unemployment befell them, many veterans now hope that they can somehow receive this payment earlier, like now. After all, if the government can literally pay billions to the banks, then surely it can provide financial assistance to war heroes.
Yes, yes. There should be no excuse. There should be absolutely no excuse. If you can pay billions to banks, I am sure you have enough money to be paying your veterans. There can be no excuse.
This grows into a movement, and hundreds of thousands of what is quickly dubbed the Bonus Army flocked to Washington in the spring and summer of 1932 to lobby for a new bonus bill to release their payments earlier. They set up in one of the many makeshift shanty towns, popularly known as Hoovervilles, that have sprung up all over the United States because of rampant homelessness. At first, the government tolerates the presence of the Bonus Army. But even when their proposed bill is defeated in mid-June, many still remain in their encampments. So tension begins to mount. In late July, Hoover orders Army Chief of Staff General Douglas MacArthur to clear out the main Bonus Army camp along the Anacostia River. But MacArthur goes above and beyond his duty. He orders his soldiers to destroy the camp and drive the veterans out of Washington altogether. They fire tear gas, advance with bayonets, and burn the encampments. Most veterans flee, but some stay and fight, hurling bricks or tin cans back at the marching soldiers. They are not a real match for a fully equipped army, though. A certain major by the name George S. Patton is in charge of around 600 men in the operation, and he recalls, "Bricks flew, sabers rose and fell with a comforting smack, and the mob ran. We moved on after them, occasionally meeting serious resistance. Once, 6 men in a truck threw a regular barrage of bricks, and several men and horses were hit. 2 of us charged at a gallop and had some nice work at close range with the occupants of the truck, most of whom could not sit down for some days." Many veterans had brought their families and their entire life possessions with them. And now the soldiers burn down what is essentially their homes with no regard for the fact that they are full of everything these families own. Images of this are picked up by the media, with newspapers across the country covering the events, and the plight of the Bonus Army now elicits mass sympathy among the general public. Although it is MacArthur who is mostly responsible for the overreach, the buck stops with the commander-in-chief, President Hoover, who instantly faces an even more significant loss in reputation. When Franklin Roosevelt, the Democratic presidential nominee, reads about the event in the New York Times, he expresses sympathy for the veterans, but also some satisfaction, reportedly telling an aide that they no longer need to take Hoover seriously as an opponent after such an unmitigated disaster.
The president began this campaign with the same attitude with which he has approached so many of the serious problems of the past 3 years. He sought to create the impression that there was no campaign on at all, just as he had sought to create the impression that all was well with the United States and that there was no depression.
His prediction is correct. In November 1932, Roosevelt wins the election in a landslide, carrying 42 of the 48 states, or the Electoral College, and 57.4 of the popular vote against Hoover's 39.7. But by the time FDR is inaugurated in March 1933, things have only gotten worse. Bank failures have surged, and state governors across the country have declared mandatory bank holidays. In a desperate attempt to maintain prices, farmers are now burning their crops. Ominously, and only weeks before he takes office, Roosevelt survives an assassination attempt in Miami. But despite the pessimism gripping the country, Roosevelt exudes optimism and confidence during his inaugural address.
Man, the US presidents, they always having these people trying to kill them. I mean, what's going on? I'm not sure in our modern times, like in the 2000s, whether any of the US presidents were ever, having this kind of situation where, someone tried to assassinate them. But really, in that country, ever since, what was his name again? President Lincoln, he was also assassinated. John F. Kennedy, he was assassinated. And now I'm hearing this story about Franklin Roosevelt also being attempted, assassination attempt. So yeah, it's odd. What's going on with you guys? Killing your presidents.
He challenges the millions of Americans who are listening on their radio to struggle with him to save America, famously declaring
that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
And he wastes no time before making changes. However, it's not really a unified program. It's consistent improvisation and reaction. Nevertheless, he and his circle of advisors, dubbed the Brain Trust, now develop a set of policies that together will famously become the first New Deal. His first priority is fixing the banking system. He declares a mandatory bank holiday and then pushes the Emergency Bank Act through legislation. The act gives the government the power to close banks in danger of failing and reopen those that will be stable. The Fed is empowered to pump more currency into banks. These immediate measures do much to re-foster public trust in the banking system.
But you see, that's what I like about his way of doing it. He's telling the federal government to close those banks that are not going to make it, that are failing, and then the ones that are stable and they have a future prospect of being stable, we support them, we give them the financial aid that they need, not just throw money at all the banks like the previous President Hoover, throwing billions of dollars of money into all these banks, not even sure whether any of them are going to survive or continue to work or to operate. You're just throwing money just to make them, sustainable only for that short period of time. Like they're on, what is it called again? They're in ICU. Yes, they're in ICU, and you're trying to pump them up with drugs and stuff like that just to try to keep them alive. No, don't do that. Cut them off. Those that can make it, you support those ones. Yeah, I like that.
So depositors quickly stop hoarding cash and place it back into savings. The regular operation of banks begins once again, and the stock markets react positively. Although it's difficult to discern any single economic theory behind his policy, Roosevelt is certainly convinced that it is essential to reflate the economy, meaning that the severely depressed prices have to rise. For that, cash needs to move more freely, though. And with this in mind, he prohibits the private hoarding of gold currency and bullion, the export of gold, and takes government control over domestic gold production already in April 1933. 2 weeks later, on the 20th, he unlinks the dollar from the gold standard to let the dollar be traded at free market valuation. It plunges by 11.5% against the European currencies still on the gold standard. This gives hope for increased exports, and the stock market rises, enabling the acquisition of much-needed capital for the ailing industry. Social programs designed to stimulate the economy are also introduced. The most famous is the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. If you were a single, healthy, unemployed young man and a member of a family on relief, you could sign up for the Corps and go to help preserve and repair America's agricultural economy. Most of the wages will go to the man's family as he works to build bridges, prevent floods, save crops from grasshoppers, and other such tasks.
But you said if you are single. But I saw family members there. So which is it? Are you eligible if you're single or if you have family? Or is it both? Yeah. Okay, Indian Idol. All right.
Huge stimulus packages are introduced. The Public Works Administration, PWA, is set up and empowered with $3.3 billion, which is almost 6% of the nation's entire economy, to fund large-scale public works like dams, bridges, and schools. Other agencies are formed, like the Civil Works Administration, a jobs creation program, which by the end of the year 1933 has already given 4 million Americans work. All of this is supported by a presidential public communications program, the first of its kind, with bi-weekly press conferences where FDR continues to exude confidence. He frequently broadcasts his fireside chats on the radio where he casually relays his policy to the public.
I'm starting to like this president's, initiatives. I'm starting to really like them. I just, I wish we could learn from it and then try to import it into South Africa. Uh, because really, uh, I'm sorry that I'm talking about South African issues on this video. It's just that, hearing what this president and his administration has been doing, to try and reignite the economy, and, his leadership style in terms of always communicating with his people. This is the type of thing that we would need in South Africa, really, because our president, our politics, our economy is just in the doldrums right now, you know? And yeah, definitely we need someone like a Roosevelt leading our country. We also need to wipe out, okay, not wipe out, that's a strong word, but we need to clear out the politicians that are currently holding positions and bring in people who actually have experience in civil servants, as well as experience in whatever academic field, to lead the country and not have political ideologues and just politicians wanting to survive, to eat, and that's it. So yeah, I'm really jealous. Although Roosevelt is long gone, and the Great Depression is long gone from the United States of America, I'm just so jealous that they had leadership like this, that they voted in leadership like this. They had the choice and they did it. Yeah, I'm jealous.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be.
But to turn around this huge drifting ship that is the United States of America and have her sailing at full speed again is no small task. And it meets its challenges. Some of the programs that the FDR White House introduces are seen as government overreach. One of them, the National Industrial Recovery Act, is even found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court and overturned. At any rate, this unprecedented federal involvement in the economy changes U.S. politics forever. Also, in parallel to the economic downturn, massive droughts strike the Midwest in 3 waves to create the infamous and iconic Dust Bowl. This part natural, part man-made disaster creates terrible hardships across rural America. Nonetheless, the economy grows by over 10% most years for the rest of the 1930s, though in 37 and 38, it briefly slips back into recession as FDR's administration ends many of the New Deal programs. Taxes are raised, so the top tax bracket is 79% by 1936, raising accusations of damaging the free market economy through wealth distribution. Public debt soars from $23 billion in 1933 to $40 billion 6 years later, leaving future administrations to deal with some of the effects. When the last drought ends and the dust settles in 1939, unemployment has sunk to 17%, but that is far from full employment, and GDP is still not back to the 1929 level. The Great Depression, though, keeps the U.S. mostly involved with itself, instead of taking an active part in the dramatic events of the world in the 1930s. The crisis sends repercussions across the globe, contributing to the destabilization of the world economy during the entire decade. In an ironic twist of history, it is the ensuing global conflagration which will finally bring America back from the precipice of bankruptcy once and for all. If you'd like to see how the crisis begins, you can watch our video on the Wall Street crash right here, like any second now. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Christian Petrov. With contributions from people like Christian, we can avoid depression ourselves and continue doing more content just like this. So be like him and join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. Subscribe and ring that bell. And Remember the wise words of Pythagoras. Concern should drive us into action, not into a depression. No man is free who cannot control himself. Cheers.
Should drive us into action and not into depression. No man is free who cannot control himself. I love that line. I'm going to use that. I'm going to really use that multiple times. Multiple times. We're heading to elections in 2024. So, yeah, I'm going to be using this line, definitely. Guys, this was the state of the US is depressing. The Great Depression between two wars, 1933, part 2 of 3 by Time Goes to History. Yes, like I said before, I'm jealous. I'm jealous of, how the American public have voted in a president who gave them answers, or who was giving them solutions to their problems, who told them that it's going to be a rough ride, it's not going to be easy, and he was holding their hands, from beginning to end. He was talking to them through the radio. He was giving them information on what does it mean to be, a bank, and what does the bank do, what does it serve to the public, and how does it survive, how does it contribute to your own, employment. And definitely Roosevelt really tried his best. He did his best, and his administration also did their best to get the US out of the fire, to pull the US out of danger, and try to keep it safe and steer it into a different path. Hoover, I don't know what was he doing really. Him and his decisions, especially like bailing out the banks, he should have tried it a different way, just like how Roosevelt did it. Maybe that would have helped him out. But then his very strong-handed tactics in terms of dismantling and displacing the soldiers, the veterans from World War I, was also just not right. It was not right at all. And yeah, really, as I hear Indian Idol talking about the US and their depression period during 1933, all I can think about is my country. We're not in depression. We are in a recession, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember right now. But, we are not at full cylinders as an economy. We are stagnant. We are stagnant. We are led by people who don't really know what they're doing. Like, the country's on autopilot mode. And, people are also becoming disenchanted with voting. They are losing that faith in democracy, in the processes of democracy. And, they come up with excuses saying, who should we vote for? There's no one to vote for. They keep making excuses and telling themselves that there's nothing that they can do, that this is the way things are, and there's nothing we can do to change it. And I find that very frustrating and very irritating, really, when I hear people talk like that. So definitely this saying here of concern should drive us into action, is very important. Because, my people, we are concerned about the future of our country. But for some reason, we are not driving it or driving ourselves into action to change our future. So, yeah, this was a nice episode, but really it reminded me so much of about what's happening here at home. And yeah, guys. Okay, guys, that's it. If you want to check out the original video as well as Time Goes to History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. and I will see you guys next week Tuesday. Okay, bye bye.